February 20th, 1943. The chill dawn north of Kasserine Pass. German Panzer IVs idled in the orange dust, their commanders squinting through smoke-filled valleys as something unnerving unfolded. 5 American Shermans advanced not in scattered confusion but in perfect synchronization, each tank maneuvering as if connected by a single mind. No hand signals, no flares, no runners darting through gunfire. To the Wehrmacht observers it looked like magic, a mechanical organism acting with instinctive precision. Inside those Shermans, the secret wasn't thicker armor or faster engines. It was the hum of invisible electricity. Each crew spoke through headsets linked to something unheard of in 1943 tank warfare: frequency-modulated radios. Crystal-controlled, static-free. They cut through the roar of engines like a conductor guiding an unseen symphony. German tankers, relying on short-range amplitude-modulated sets, could barely reach their platoon leaders. American crews, by contrast, spoke clearly across miles. The difference wasn't just technology, it was communication as a weapon. The Wehrmacht's FUG-5 sets, once the pride of German engineering, were relics by comparison. 10 watts of output, easily drowned by engine noise, their signals faded within a kilometer whenever the tanks were moving. Only the platoon leaders' vehicles could transmit at all, the rest merely listened, fighting in silence. When command tanks fell, so did communication. The Americans, unknowingly, had built a network before the word existed. Every tank a node, every voice part of a living map of the battlefield. This revolution began not on a battlefield but in a laboratory. 2 years earlier, engineers at the Galvin Manufacturing Company, soon to be Motorola, were perfecting the Army Signal Corps' SCR-508 series. Weighing 181 pounds, it carried 10 preset channels and an astonishing 25 watts of power. It was the brainchild of Daniel E. Noble and Henrik Magnuski, who dared to mount sensitive FM circuits inside rumbling steel giants. Their creation turned Detroit's assembly lines into transmitters of a new kind of firepower, the electromagnetic kind. As these machines rolled into North Africa with Operation Torch, no one, not even the Germans, yet realized that the future of war had changed. It wasn't forged in steel or gunpowder, but in the silent frequency bands that only American tank crews could hear. And at Kasserine Pass, that silence spoke louder than any gunfire. But this was only the beginning. Before long, those invisible waves would decide battles across Europe, and Germany would discover too late that they were fighting an enemy connected by more than steel. November 8, 1942. Operation Torch. The first wave of American tanks rolled ashore at Safi and Fidala under a haze of salt spray and artillery smoke. Among the men of the 2nd Armored Division, a quiet revolution rode with them, the SCR-508. To the untrained eye, it was just another box of wires bolted to the steel hull. But when those dials came alive, the desert filled with something no one had ever heard before: flawless communication. For the first time, an entire armored battalion could speak in real time across the chaos of battle. Across the dunes, German panzer divisions strained to understand what they were witnessing. Their radios crackled with distortion, a storm of static masking desperate voices. The FUG-5 sets that once coordinated lightning advances across Poland and France now faltered in the African heat. Each spark plug firing within the tanks produced interference. Engine noise drowned orders. By contrast, American FM transmitters ignored the chaos, slicing through the electromagnetic fog with surgical precision. To the Germans, it seemed that every Sherman commander shared a single mind. The numbers told the story. The German FUG-5, transmitting at barely 10 watts, reached 2 kilometers at best. The American SCR-508, pushing 25 watts through crystal-controlled channels, reached 10. Even moving across broken terrain, Sherman crews kept in touch as if connected by wire. Platoon leaders could coordinate fire, warn of ambushes, and redirect artillery within seconds. The battlefield, once a tangle of smoke and guesswork, had become a network, invisible, intelligent, and devastatingly effective. Even captured German reports from the Afrika Korps revealed a sense of disbelief. Signal officers noted that American radio traffic maintained unusual clarity at long distance. They couldn't explain it, Some suspected a new encryption system, others an unknown amplifier. The truth was simpler and more profound: frequency modulation. Where German amplitude systems distorted under noise, FM filtered it out completely. The static that crippled German command nets barely registered in American headsets. A whisper across the desert could sound like a conversation in a quiet room. By early 1943, as Sherman columns thundered through the Tunisian hills, their coordination seemed supernatural. German tankers facing them at Kasserine reported that the Americans moved as though guided by radar. They weren't. They were guided by connection, by the power of shared awareness in a world that still fought blind. But the deserts of Tunisia were only the testing ground. Soon, these invisible frequencies would climb mountains, cross oceans, and decide the fate of Europe. September 1943, southern Italy. Rain fell in sheets over the Apennine foothills as American armor crawled forward through mud that swallowed tracks whole. Here, terrain was the true enemy. Valleys that bent radio waves, stone ridges that silenced orders. Yet the SCR-508 refused to die. Its FM signals bounced, refracted, and still reached through the storm. In an era when even shouting between tanks could vanish in the wind, crews still heard the calm voices of their commanders cutting through the static. German panzers on the same slopes fought half-blind. Their FUG-5 radios, designed for the open plains of France, died in the narrow valleys of Salerno and Cassino. Each cliff face became an acoustic wall. The Wehrmacht's hierarchy, built around command tanks transmitting orders, collapsed whenever the lead vehicle was hit. Meanwhile, every American Sherman could step into command instantly. If one tank fell silent, another picked up the channel. It wasn't just resilience, it was distributed intelligence, a battlefield nervous system that never lost its mind. As the campaign ground forward, new improvisations appeared. Infantrymen advancing beside the tanks couldn't hear the radio chatter. Their SCR-300 walkie-talkies used a higher 40 to 48 MHz band, completely incompatible. In the hedgerows of Italy, that mismatch turned deadly. Soldiers could see enemy ambushes forming but had no way to warn the armored columns. The fix came not from a laboratory but from the field. A field telephone wired in a battered ammunition box, bolted to the rear plate of every Sherman. A soldier could lift the handset, shout "Panzerfaust left," and the crew would hear it instantly. Simple, brutal, brilliant. By late 1943, American reports read like science fiction. Units separated by ridgelines coordinated fire missions with second-by-second precision. The SCR-508's FM modulation shrugged off echoing signal reflections that crippled AM sets. To the men in those steel hulls, it felt as if they'd been granted a sixth sense. Orders that once required runners or flares now traveled at the speed of thought. German intercept teams could only listen in awe, clear voices in English echoing across frequencies they couldn't jam. In the Italian campaign, radios became as vital as armor, and America learned that communication could outgun firepower. But the lesson would truly unfold 1 year later, when these same networks landed in Normandy and turned hundreds of scattered tanks into one thinking army. As Europe burned from Normandy to St. Lo, those same radio waves would become the arteries of victory, and Germany would finally realize that silence kills. June 6, 1944. The beaches of Normandy roared with fire and chaos. Amid the thunder of naval guns and the scream of aircraft, the first Sherman tanks rolled down landing ramps into waist-deep surf. Salt water hissed off their hulls, sand ground beneath their treads, and through it all, their radios stayed alive. The SCR-508s crackled with calm American voices, tank commanders coordinating with ships offshore, adjusting fire with precision that defied the storm. It was a miracle of discipline and design. Steel machines talking across the apocalypse. But once inland, the hedgerows of Normandy revealed the limits of perfection. Thick earthen walls trapped sound and deflected signals. American infantry advancing ahead of the tanks could see German ambushes forming, but their SCR-300 radios, operating at a higher 40 to 48 MHz range, couldn't talk to the tank's 20 to 27 MHz sets. The result was tragic confusion. Tank crews died unaware of Panzerfaust teams hidden 10 meters away. In the bocage, radio superiority met its first true obstacle, the silence between armor and flesh. Then, ingenuity struck. Crews scavenged field telephones and spare wire from broken communication posts. Mechanics welded ammunition boxes to the tank's rear plates and wired them into the intercom circuit. A handset dangled on a hook. Soldiers could sprint up under fire, lift the receiver, and speak directly to the crew inside. Left flank clear. Machine gun nest ahead. It was crude, exposed, and life-saving. By Operation Cobra, nearly every Sherman in the 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions carried one. The battlefield had found its voice again. As July 1944 unfolded, Operation Cobra unleashed the full potential of connected warfare. Over 200 Shermans of the 2nd Armored Division advanced through shattered hedgerows, guided by radio nets alive with coordination. Commanders shifted flanking units within minutes, artillery adjusted by radio bursts, and air support answered tank calls in real time. To the German defenders of Panzer Lehr Division, it felt supernatural, as if the Americans anticipated every move. But it wasn't prophecy. It was bandwidth. It was communication speed as a weapon. When the dust settled, the battlefield was littered with the wrecks of German Panthers that never stood a chance. Superior armor had met superior coordination and lost. From that moment, the war's outcome wasn't about who had the bigger gun, but who could hear, speak, and respond faster. But the true test of this invisible network was yet to come, in the winter of 1944, when communication would decide the fate of entire armies at the Rhine. March 7, 1945. The Rhine River. The 9th Armored Division reached the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, and found it still standing. The discovery shot through American command networks like electricity. Within minutes, radio reports cascaded from platoon level to corps headquarters. Within an hour, divisions miles away were on the move, converging toward the crossing. German forces, reliant on landlines already shattered by Allied bombers, never even received the news in time to react. In the span of 60 minutes, radio superiority had turned a chance encounter into a strategic triumph. The SCR-508 now linked everything, tanks, artillery, air controllers, engineers, into a seamless web of instant coordination. What once required field telephones and messengers now took seconds. When German counterattacks formed, American tank platoons redirected artillery with near-surgical precision. Pilots above received updates from tanks below, diving on targets minutes after they were spotted. The battlefield had evolved into something terrifyingly modern, an ecosystem of information. Every radio call was a nerve impulse. Every Sherman a neuron in a collective brain. Inside the collapsing German lines, silence reigned. The once feared panzer divisions fought as isolated fragments, tanks unable to reach headquarters, infantry without artillery support, commanders with dead transmitters. The Fug-5, crippled by interference and short range, became a relic in a war that now moved at the speed of radio waves. Field Marshal Walter Model's last transmissions from the Ruhr pocket ended mid-sentence. His networks gone, his forces blind. In contrast, American tank crews fought with the certainty that someone, somewhere, was always listening. By war's end, statistics told the truth even the wreckage could not hide. Every one of the 49,000 Sherman tanks produced carried a high-powered FM radio. Every one could transmit and receive. The Wehrmacht, once the pioneer of armored communication, had fallen 5 years behind in design and decades behind in scale. American factories like Motorola's Chicago plant had built more radios than Germany could ever field tanks. Victory was measured not in steel thickness, but in signal strength, in the invisible threads that held a moving army together. In April 1945, as German troops surrendered in pockets cut off from their commanders, one captured officer summed it up bitterly, "Your tanks fought as if they shared one brain." He wasn't wrong. The SCR-508 had made that true. America had not just built an army, it had built a network. The electromagnetic revolution that began inside a Sherman tank in 1942 became the blueprint for every modern battlefield that followed. From the Gulf War to the digital front lines of today, the same lesson endures. In war, connection is survival and isolation is defeat. The Germans built better tanks. The Americans built a better army. But above all, they built a way to think together. And that invisible link would change warfare forever.